and welcome to Planet Poetry. My name's Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. And this week we're chatting to Leontia Flynn about her spare and beautiful book, Taking Liberties.
And meanwhile, Peter's been reading a collection by Bidoon poet Mona Kareem. And I've been enjoying a Carcanet Classic collection by astronomer poet Rebecca Elson.
Before we dive into our interview, just a quick apology. The sound quality isn't as good as we'd like it, but sometimes gremlins be gremlins. But never mind, I'm sure you'll find it a fascinating interview. Let's hear what Leontia Flynn had to say to Robin.
Leontia Flynn has published 4 previous collections of poetry with Jonathan Cape. She's won the Forward Prize for Best First Collection, the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, the Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Award for Irish Poetry, and the Irish Times Poetry Prize. She's twice been nominated for the T.S. Eliot Prize. She also published a pamphlet of Catullus translations, Slim New Book, with Lifeboat Press in 2020, and a book about the poet Maeve McGuckian. Leontia was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2022 and is a professor at Queen's University. She lives in Belfast. Leontia Flynn, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us where you are. We like to always ask the poets at the beginning of the interview, tell us where you are on the planet.
I am in Belfast on the Ormer Road in my office.
You're the first Northern Irish poet we've had on this podcast.
Glad to hear it.
We're going to be talking today about your latest book from Cape called Taking Liberties, which is a great title, I think. Do you find it's easy to come up with titles? It's something I struggle with, especially book titles, goodness.
I do get the title pretty early, yeah. Mostly this one, the title was always Taking Liberties. Mm-hmm. Before there were very many poems written for it, it was always called that, yeah.
Uh-huh. So you kind of wrote the poems to fit in the...
Somehow, yeah, they came along with it.
Perhaps we could start with you reading one of the poems to get us into it. Could we start with It is Solstice in the City?
Sure. It is solstice in the city. It is solstice in the city. The gulls are flying high into pale infinitesimal light. Each building on the road south from the centre is standing robustly on its own square shadow. In the empty house, one window brightens against the gathering dusk, and I watch as the sky turns to navy blue, then lilac, behind dark hedges. Night never really falls. The clock's hands move. The room starts up its cricket chorus of hums. Eloise in Argenteuil. In the pewter half-light, I scan each surface for the remnants of my gross domestic product. One sock, a half-read book, this child's plastic volcano, its small dome cooling after the explosion.
The reason I asked you to start with that is I think it kind of prefigures a lot of the themes and imagery that come throughout the book. The cityscapes, the windows, empty houses and time passing, childhood, and even Eloise, who comes back later on, doesn't she, in her own poem?
She's a different poem.
We've got this image straight away of the empty house, somewhat bleak, and I'm guessing this is to do with a breakup.
That's right, yeah.
And it ends with the child's plastic volcano. It's quite a shock when you get to the end and you see that.
Well, yes, there probably was a very real toy volcano. Really, when it was written after that sense of, incredible isolation or aloneness that I think if you've been rearing a child for several years, been all mixed up together, as a family, and then finding myself, as I did here, alone in my own in the house. It's a strange, disorientating kind of aloneness, mm-hmm. to be there on your own without your child. And the volcano was probably, one of those ones you put baking soda and like food colouring in or something, and it would have exploded. But none of these exits, I suppose, or periods of change where you then become alone happen without an explosion, I think, of some kind. So
I wonder if you could read for us now, please. On platforms and in plate glass waiting rooms.
On platforms and in plate glass waiting rooms. On platforms and in plate glass waiting rooms, people are pressing towards the sliding doors. The rails stretch out before them into the future. Everything streams from the station's loaded bow. It is early morning in late August, brittle light. A news banner on the wall-mounted TV is scrolling without fini from left to right, like the station names vivid in LED on signage boards over the sidings seats. Then footbridge, guardrail, cable, tower. Then houseback, town edge, margin, hinterland. Everything streams away and into the future, with the train car held to its horizontal shaft, and the sky unspooling beside the aisle's ribbon, away from the moment, towards the border, over the boonies, from the mind's sprung trap like a bolt. Oh, hinterland, oh, thresholds of various sorts, oh, border guards at personal history's checkpoints, oh, declarations, oh, I'm so very sad. This morning, when a really big plume of magnolia cumulonimbus rolled in the pre-dawn hours over the empty house as I leaned out the window, its timeline and sidebar passing above the trees, with my credit, data, genome and algorithm, with my passcode, thumbprint, content and preferences, softly down the rosary of my days, I sang my joyful mysteries and my sorrowful mysteries. On platforms and in interior waiting rooms, women press softly towards the sliding doors. Their journeys stretch before them to the border. One border is the loved one, another middle age. The border in this poem, for my purpose, reader, is you. Summer is fading. A light circling breeze stirs some litter by the verge, and I take my dream and carry it over the threshold, through the severed connections, the roads let fall to misuse, with my body held on the engine of my mind, as rolling stock holds to deviant Irish gauge, as a superego holds fast to the id, as a poem would carry the self far beyond the self, or as people were carried on the drive of the railway age, piston-charged, steam-powered, propulsive and intent, thundering across a continent and era in half-crazed pursuit of progress and civilization.
Thank you. I loved this poem. Railways as the unstoppable future, all this scrolling and streaming and sliding, everyday words that have been appropriated by technology. I suppose I'm thinking, in fact, this unspooling and unravelling come up again and again, sometimes with a sense of loss of control, don't they? Could you tell us a bit about how this poem came about, please?
So I had been, reading about the railway age, and that was the beginning. It was a commission, and it was to travel from Belfast to Dublin by train, and to have describe the crossing the border moment. But I was much more interested in thinking about how trains first were invented, first connected everybody, and the massive transformations that they made, to everyone's sense of themselves and where they were in relation to other people. So I spent a long time reading about, how railways were developed and brought into different countries. And, I think actually Northern Ireland, this is a weird gauge is specific to here that isn't in Britain.
Oh, yes, the deviant Irish gauge.
It's not, we have a different, and it's such a nerd, like that's a real, again, you read these things and they don't really most of it doesn't make it into the poem. But by the time I did then, because I couldn't really finish it, and then I thought, well, what am I actually writing about here? But again, it was about feeling like a passenger, I suppose, in the middle of historical change without really being able to direct it. And then I thought, you know what? And also because I just love trains. That's not in a kind of train spotty, not as nerdy as I sounded there, but I love being on trains, and because you get to daydream and you get to be away from your normal life and you're in between places, and there's a kind of always a sense that that's the sort of like that's how poems get written, that you kind of are on the move, in your imagination. So I thought, well, I think I'll probably, no matter what happens, I'll always be able to imagine myself over borders or daydream across, divisions and whatever. Also, then, of course, thinking about where I was going to move in my own personal life, I was thinking, well, you know what, I'll just keep going.
I did sense this ambivalence towards freedom of movement, because travelling is good and staying put equals bad, but that's completely not the case. That gets thrown apart in other poems. So,
well, I think what was going on there is that for me, like, I always really need to travel to sort of get ideas and to write. But there was the sense that the freedom, of movement would be impeded by, the kind of, Trump was also on the go here. So you were thinking about walls, weapons, people kind of sort of turning back inwards and being isolationist or protectionist.
Yeah. Yes, I wasn't sure if we were also referring to then the whole COVID period. I mean, it sounds like these were written before then, but then there was that sense where people were isolated and we were locked in.
Yeah, it sort of felt as if that I had been already kind of writing out of or about isolation, sort of psychological aloneness, maybe, that I'd felt, and but also not always in a bad way, because I think if you don't particularly like the outside world or people, then there's not a lot of freedom in that sort of space. It was a domestic space, but it's also, like being on the train. It's not impervious to, the social conflicts and decisions and so on. So you're being carried along by that, and you're kind of vulnerable to it. But there is, I think, there was a sense of the emotional experience that was really ongoing and kind of surround and enveloping for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, let's move into a safe space where we're enveloped in a lovely warm place in the municipal pool.
In the municipal pool. In the municipal pool beside the parenting room, where I go betimes to attend my inner child, water is falling from the closed communal showers. Clear, hot, chemical, moving, utterly free, steam ascends to the foam white ceiling tiles. In the furthest stall, where the drain grids hiss, an Italian woman is chatting and laughing. She is what I imagine Elena Ferrante might look like naked, mature and handsome, at ease in our world of women without men. Clear, hot, chemical, moving, utterly free, the waters flow, are flowing and flown, as outside sun shines and history beats on the roof of the Gynoeceum.
Thank you. The Gynoeceum. I had to look that up. A sort of a women-only space.
Yeah. Yes, and we don't really call them municipal pools here, so this probably had its origin outside Belfast, maybe somewhere else. You don't get that many single-sex spaces. You know what I mean? Like, that was a kind of like it's a change. And I swim a lot, and I was just enjoying myself and kind of having fun.
No, it was great, but also the Roman word, it brings back the idea of empire. So I like that. There's another echo there.
Some of the lines there are from Elizabeth Bishop, like, exile from normal life, exile from social or life I'd known it.
There are some lovely phrases here, and your use of internal rhyme, I think, is very mesmerising and beautiful.
Thank you.
I noticed that quite a number of these poems, the majority in this book, the title is the same as the first line. Is that something you've always done, or is that particular to this book?
No, it's very particular to this book. I thought, I'm just going to write very spare poems and try to have less in them, and it was a way of making them more minimalist, I suppose. I wanted lots of white space and taking liberties, as I first conceived it, was taking liberties also from a certain kind of poetry and maybe a more formal or sort of discursive, talky poem. And I just kind of, my own life had become sort of minimalist in some way that it hadn't been, and I it was a sort of less is more thing. And I also wanted fewer poems. I wanted a short book. I really, really, really wanted to write a short book. And I kept pushing and saying I wanted, but anyway, yes.
That totally makes sense, because what you're saying about it being spare, it is in this short lines. It's mostly written in sort of these short quatrains, and I did get that feeling. Only towards the end, I think there's one poem that's a little more discursive and long lines and kind of let loose a bit there. But I'm just interested. I think having the title as the first line, I rather liked the look of it on the page as well. It has quite a sort of classical feel, quite a sort of traditional feel. I think I enjoyed that. I wonder if you would read Now That the Verdict's In for us, please.
Okay. Now that the verdict's in. Now that the verdict's in, the voice is raised, the arguments advanced, and assets tabled for a split. The city stops, seeming to ask, what now? The streets are bare at noon, as though inhaled, a sense of locked rooms and hasty consultation. And over the vacant lot, beyond my desk, 3 herring gulls reel up, protesting, high and white like ticker tape reversed, airborne relief. What now for words or for the hate which boils and courses through nervous systems? Look, I'm pushing back my chair and going home, that once bright casket from which the jewels have been freshly robbed by the river road which follows the curve of the earth, and where, left since the workers downed their tools, the trees on either side crowd in, weighed down with both neglect and bounty.
There's such a lot of interesting use here of the word verdict has this really clipped, tight feel to it, and that sound comes through, this stopped sound, like locked rooms, vacant lots. What now? I really admired that skillful writing, and towards the end, the curve of earth and the workers down their tools and the trees on either side crowd in, weighed down with both neglect and bounty. It's just such a lovely sort of oral sensation when you read that.
I'm very glad you think so. You picked up like more of the sort of sounds than I was aware of. I probably only noticed it unconsciously, but you're right. There's lots of O's and.
There's a quote that I didn't know, that once bright casket from which the jewels have been freshly robbed. Where does that come from?
I think that's probably Ted Hughes.
Oh, is it?
Is no longer, like, again, like a sort of sense of the family was this kind of casket, and then the emptiness of the house again.
The streets are bare at noon as though inhaled. I loved that. It reminded me of that Ina Barber's speech in Antony and Cleopatra, where the air rushes away to gaze on Cleopatra.
Yeah, and the sense of vacancy, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Actually, this is really post-Brexit. I do remember the sense of sort of shock and everyone being sort of taken aback, and a sense that everyone had sort of was indoors, perhaps on their computers or talking about it or commenting on it, and really feeling as if there was a kind of unseen crisis taking place elsewhere, and I was having my own crisis and verdicts with relation to that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Some of these poems, they have the same construction of the title, which is in and on, in the musical pool, or in and on. That's got to be another deliberate. I read it as being to do with being inside, or being inside as opposed to being outside. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I probably did have that sense of different locations, and the sense, like things, there was an idea of like maybe things always being connected or rolling or scrolling into connection with some other place or location or person. And on a less elevated level, maybe it's, if I have an opening line, it just tends to produce more than one poem. It's like I will reuse it because it sort of sets something in motion. And when I write, I normally one poem produces another and another, and so they're not always totally separate. But yeah, that particular construction just sort of kept coming back. I think it's always good to begin a poem actually with. It's very boring, but with where you are.
Oh no, that's not boring. That's a good thought.
Yeah, just like make it simple.
Well, talking of simple, you've also got 4 poems, I think, in here, 4 sonnets that are just, X poem, cat poem, tortoise poem.
I know.
That was.
I know. I did think about
screwing
giving
up
them
your
titles.
face. I like them.
I know. But they'd never. I think like there were no titles. There was never going to be a title for them. The only question was whether they call them the first line again. But I suppose in my documents, in my drafts, they were always called cat poem, budgie poem, tortoise poem, and that's just okay. Well, that's what they're called. Yeah.
I wonder if you might read The Mother of Parliaments for us, please.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes. The Mother of Parliaments. The Mother of Parliaments is having a nervous breakdown as we gather your things, switch off and leave the house. The trees shake in this storm as the day shakes in this week. In your polka dot lap, you clutch your allotted baggage. How I love you at last, daughter, born of my flesh and my finite economy of energy and presence. You move between your parents' opposing fronts, like the little square puck in the 1975 Atari home console video game Pong, moving back and forth, pock, pock, between two paddles. Pock, 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 pock. The premise is simple enough. This goes on for so long as the other shall fail to miss.
We should explain, for someone who's not got the poem in front of them, the layout breaks up and changes to the end, so it looks like it's going from one side to the other, doesn't it?
Like Pong.
The pock, 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 just like
like the
Pong.
little ball.
Yeah, and I love the way it finishes, for so long as the other shall fail to miss. This is a bit like for as long as we both shall live, a little bit of a kind of a little bit of a reference back to the start of the marriage, whatever. I really love this. I mean, this could be perhaps one of the most personal ones. I don't know, but it's
yes, too personal probably for many people.
No, I thought it was absolutely beautiful, and I wasn't sure whether the child was your child or whether it was you as a child because of the reference to 1975. So there's this kind of like looking back, and yet we're in the present.
Well, in fairness, now I have played Pong comparatively recently, but again, like, because there's a few analog technologies or older technologies in it as well, which is obviously dating both me and my interest. You win by just kind of just continually being in the right place.
Yeah.
When I wrote this, I didn't really sort of see it ending up there, because it does begin with the Brexit withdrawal arrangement, which is what the Mother of Parliament was in the headline. It was literally, that was the headline, the Mother of Parliament having a nervous breakdown. You know,
right from the start, we're pulling back from the political to the personal, and little moments like, in your polka dot lap, you clutch your allotted baggage. It's very sweet.
Yes, it's kind of a love poem to my daughter as well.
Oh, that's how it comes across. I think it is really lovely.
She's quite sceptical of all of this endeavour, but anyway.
Could we hear? I'd love to hear cat poem, because I love a cat poem, and I don't know why is it we're told not to write poems about cats. It's a bit much, really.
Well, nobody told me.
No, but us poor mortals, we go to workshops and things, and that's the sort of thing we're told.
Well, I mean, this is a lockdown poem, because having already, been relatively isolated, then I did spend time mainly with my daughter when she was with me, and a cat, and also a tortoise. Cat's poem. The cat turns her back. The cat walks on the spot between 2 and 3 a.m. on a circumscribed part of my chest. The cat is pure of heart. In the dart of her ears, in her glance, the cat carries her loss into each quiet room like a study by Gwen John. Lying in slanted light, the cat toys with the skein of the long association, long and quite cordial, between me and the cat.
Of course, there is the lovely Cat Jeffrey poem as well. So I mean, and I think written in isolation, holed up with your cat. I think there should be a tradition of that.
There's probably quite a few. I think there might be many isolation cat poems.
There is something about their behaviour that.
Yes, she was quite easy to watch. It was quite nice to watch moving. I always thought she was quite pretty.
She carries her loss into each quiet room. Oh, that's so gorgeous.
I would just look around and she would be there, to my surprise, and we kind of just got along together.
We mentioned earlier that most of the poems in this book have this spare style to them, but we do have a poem right at the end. Actually, is it the very last poem in the book is entitled?
Oh, yeah.
It's entitled Summer is Fading, but we've already had a previous poem, actually a sort of little mini sequence with that title before that. And we've also had the phrase Summer is Fading right at the beginning, in one of the poems you read at the beginning, I think.
It was in the train poem, yeah. But originally actually called. And
I sort of got the sense that this was a kind of being of a different style, and it just it feels like you're pulling towards some sense of peace or acceptance or something towards the end of this poem.
This is the very last, Summer is Fading.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the 5 before it, yes, used the first line, and it. I think I used it in a different book. It's not my line. It's the first line of a poem by Philip Larkin,
right.
Which is so simple. And again, I think simplicity is something I value and seek to achieve. I don't think you need to write anything very complicated.
Yeah,
it stays with me, that phrase. I just sort of hear it all the time, and I'll use it again. I definitely will. But the last poem in the book, I suppose this is a sort of resolution or some sense of personal coming through of, I mean, it was lockdown, it was COVID, it was the previous 5-6 years. I also moved house in the middle of all of this.
Yeah.
But there had been roads, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of railway roads, things moving, limits and city limits. But I suppose then I transferred that sense of movement or flow onto the river. I mean, it is in looking out the window of the train as well. Quite keen on this river.
It feels as if you've returned to nature, descriptions of nature, and as if human intervention is no longer sort of knocking heads with nature, which we've had before with the buildings and the technology. I don't know, that I sort of got that feeling from it. Are we going to hear it? Sorry, I'm talking about it.
Okay. Summer is fading. Summer is fading. There is ivy clustered about the trunks of the alders that line this stretch of the river, and bindweed twists up the railing. The river itself is high. It passes turbid and eddying, pitted with rain. Storms have broken some of the uppermost branches of the older trees, and low on the bank whole saplings. Crows roost there, and there are magpies and herring gulls feeding. They hover low or run about on the mud. No one would call it beautiful, this city's river. The bridges that span it are of grey, brutalist concrete with weedy verges. Below tangled roots and scrubs, rusted objects can sometimes be seen sunk on the tide line. No one would call it beautiful, but this morning it is beautiful, when the sunlight rests its arm on the gull-covered water, and the dog daisies and orchids, wild in the banks, are prettier for being overgrown. The river is mud brown, but later the sky will have cleared to a soft pale blue with bright little ribs of stratus and a saltire made of contrail over the traffic that grumbles resurgent where the river follows its course.
I loved that tremendous phrase, where the sunlight rests its arm on the gull-covered water.
I kept taking that out and putting it back in. I was like, I don't know, is that too poetic? It's like...
In my mind, I like it because it comes in amongst all this, the brutalist concrete and the weedy verges. Personally, I liked it.
I like a city river. I don't necessarily want to walk into the country to see a river there, strangely, but I do like a river that runs through a city. It's kind of an incredible thing.
So it's a wonderful book, taking liberties, and Leontia Flynn. It's been wonderful having you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, really interesting interview with Leontia. I think I found the idea of what was going on in her personal life and the way she was feeling being mirrored in the outside world really fascinating, because I think it's quite interesting. It's a trick that many poets do of erasing, blurring that distinction between what's inside you and what's outside you. The solstice in the city, there was a aloneness of the empty house, and that sense of you almost felt like the city was empty as well. And that thing about now that the verdict's in, there's this kind of crisis that's ruptured her own life, which is reflected in the feeling that's on the streets and the kind of sense of people muttering about things all over the city. It's like an objective correlative or something, I think is what
Oh, is that
Eliot would have called it.
Is that the phrase? Yes, that kind of sense of vacancy in that poem, Solstice in the City. And it all seems to be this perfect storm, doesn't it? The Brexit referendum and then the COVID, staying at home, and then her being alone, whereas before she was part of a family, and
that whole world being empty.
Completely oppressive. And I really liked how she explored the being at home, or the being trapped, or the being not being able to move and having to stay put, versus the way she uses her travelling.
Yeah, like the potential freedom of all those railways, and, you know, the potential escape of leaving, but somehow she can't. And even the railway track is weird because of it being
a funny gauge, yes.
Yeah.
And she said she was commissioned to write a poem about crossing the border and that sort of thing, but somehow it turns into a personal story as well.
Yeah, on platforms and in plate glass waiting rooms.
Yeah.
I just love the detail of her language. Like in that Solstice in the City, she talks about in the pewter half-light, and I just think, God, the word pewter there is absolutely perfect.
Yes.
And she has got that, I think you were talking about the way she plays with sound.
Yes.
You know, there's such a musicality. There's a kind of, you know, rhetoric there sometimes as well, you know, now that the verdict's in, making me, like most things do, making me think of a Yeats-type grandeur, you know, to it.
Yeah, you're right. She uses these rhetorical devices very effectively. And in the second part of that poem, on platforms and in plate glass waiting rooms, it begins with this 5-line stanza with every line starts with O.
Yeah.
O hinterland, O thresholds of various sorts. And then the last line is, oh, I'm very sad. She's quite playful.
Yeah, a nice sort of bathos to it.
Yes.
But it's like the world knows her, you know, that in that poem, there's this giant rain cloud. It knows all about her credit and data and genome and so on.
Yes.
That sense of the world knowing everything about her.
Yeah.
I thought was very interesting. I liked also in that first one, in the Solstice in the City, the first one she read, I love that poem. She is alone and nothing much is happening. At the end, she's building a poem from one sock, a half-read book. She's piecing her life together again from all these broken bits.
Yes, yes.
And that volcano, you know, the plastic volcano that's erupted, and you're left with just nothing, stillness. I just really enjoyed her poetry, which I didn't know very well. And hooray for the cat poem as well. I mean, there's all us cat lovers, that phrase about their relationship being long and quite cordial. It's absolutely perfect, isn't it?
I think so. Yes, the cat walks on the spot between 2 and 3 a.m. on a circumscribed part of my chest.
But again, you know, it's that when everything else has been stripped away. I mean, I think many of us felt that in lockdown particularly, you know, that actually having animals around was a real boon in terms of companionship.
And actually, the other poems of that kind in the book, there are 4, I think.
Yeah.
She's playing, she's having fun, but she is also using them to interrogate, this situation of being stuck at home. Now, Peter, I believe you've been reading some poetry in translation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I briefly broke off from reading about Neanderthals to start reading poetry again. And I've been reading a collection called I Will Not Fold These Maps by Mona Karim. And it's published by the Poetry Translation Centre, and it's part of their World Poets series.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting when I always love reading poems in translation because it opens up an entirely different world to you in a way. Mm. And Mona Karim now lives in the US, but she was born in Kuwait, and she's part of what they call the Bidoon community. And there are several Arab countries where there are Bidoon communities, and what Bidoon are people that are stateless. So, for example, if Mona Karim, when she left Kuwait, she's not regarded as a citizen, even though she was born there, and is not, allowed to re-enter the country. I'm guessing this is partly to do with people that have been invited in as workers to do jobs and things that have settled there and had children, and those children have no rights. But Obviously, her sort of statelessness has led to a sense of not quite belonging to anywhere. And it's quite fascinating, even though she's got a strong feeling of home about Kuwait, not being able to return there. Her poetry is kind of very direct and has sort of surreal images in and so on, and very fresh in its imagery, I think. So anyway, she's now living in the US, and she's had poems published quite well in the US. I think she's had several collections, and had a long poem published in Poetry London not too long ago. But here's a poem from I Will Not Fold These Maps, and I think it draws from her early collections. And here's a poem called My Body, My Vehicle. My body is my vehicle. I drive her like a reckless teen. She crashes into others, into sidewalks. She breaks red lights at the last second as the death policeman shakes his head. Sometimes I lose one of my features, a strand of hair or an organ, and I find no spare parts in the junkyard. I lose my silver lips and my grease-coated heart. I lose my rotating hat, then my left hand, and with it my peripheral vision. Like a Canadian on Mondays, I start the engine softly and shovel the surrounding snow. I let her warm up and come alive, regain her senses, for no vehicle rises from bed ready to face the street. In the room, I let her roam. Every time an idea struggles for air, she scratches with her unkempt nails the wooden floors, waiting for language until it unfurls, easing the crisis. What do I do with this vehicle of mine? I cannot park her, abandon her anywhere. When I go shopping, my wheels shatter the glossy ceramic floors, and when I go to the beach, she sinks into the sand. Small and dark, complected and broken, her windows are an almanac of winds, and her voice falters at rush hour.
Goodness.
An interesting and distinct voice, I think. And the translator is Sarah El-Kamel. And I think, as far as I can tell, she did a very good job of putting them into a lovely, fluent English.
It's like it was in two halves. Like at the beginning, she was driving her body like a crazy thing and bits were dropping off, but she was just flying. And then we have her sort of needing to warm her body up like a Canadian starting their car on a Monday morning, and suddenly everything becomes really hard work and really sort of a huge effort, like your body's aging very quickly.
Yeah, she says, what can I do with this vehicle of mine? I cannot park her, abandon her anywhere. I think that sense of exile makes you locate your home inside your body in a way. It's almost like a home's been shrunk to this idea of a car, something that's always moving.
Yes, that bit at the beginning about sometimes she loses a feature. Was it a strand of hair or an organ? Quite a difference, really.
Yeah, it's like bits of the car.
Interesting, though.
Yeah, those surreal images can be very powerful, I think.
So it's a slim volume, this book.
It's called I Will Not Fold These Maps by Mona Karim, published by the Poetry Translation Centre, part of their World Poet series. And it's translated by Sarah El-Kamel. After we did that episode on translated poetry, I always feel absolutely obliged to mention the translator.
Gosh, yes. Yeah.
They do so much work, and they're very much the unsung heroes of international poetry.
Yes, yes.
So what's been finding its way onto your desk, Robin?
Well, I've subscribed for years to a newsletter called The Marginalian.
Oh, yes.
By Maria Popova.
Yeah.
It used to be called Brain Pickings, but changed its name.
I prefer the Marginalian somehow.
Yeah.
Like the pickings.
Yeah, the Brain Pickings is, the Marginalian. And it's hard to describe, really. It's kind of human philosophy, literature. It focuses on all aspects of living and being alive and facing all the things that one faces living and making the most of our lives, and grief and death and all the rest of it. And she draws upon a huge encyclopedic knowledge, it feels, of writers, academics, poets, philosophers, songwriters, musicians. She
Visual
seems to
artist too, yeah.
Visual artists. Yeah, she pulls out so many examples. She'll have a theme and she'll pull out a huge number of links, and it's quite overwhelming sometimes. But anyway, it was in a recent edition of the Marginalian that I discovered the name Rebecca Elson, a poet who I didn't know, and she died some time ago, 1999. She was young. She was an astronomer as well as a poet, and she had cancer from the age of 29, and she died age 39. So, but there was this period of her life towards the end where she was just writing these glorious poems about, I suppose, she was faced with her end coming up. So I got hold of her book. It's called A Responsibility to Awe, published by Carcanet.
To Awe, O-R.
Awe, A-W-E. It includes quite a lot of her poems, but actually at least half the book is devoted to her notes, her notebooks, and that in itself is fascinating, actually, just reading through. I mean, some of her notes you would say, well, these are poems as well, but they were kind of works in progress. And then towards the end is a really interesting essay that she wrote towards the end of her life called From Stones to Stars. And it's kind of a potted autobiography, if you like, memoir, where she talks about how her father was a geologist and took her out on field trips from a very young age. And then she goes on to just talk about her career and how she got into astronomy. And there was a nice section where she found solace, if you like, in her poetry group that she went to, because it was so different from the kind of the rigor and the ambition and the kind of competition of scientists. So it was kind of an antidote. So I really enjoyed this book. I just thought it was just a wonderful thing to discover.
The Responsibility to Awe, is it called?
It's called A Responsibility to Awe. And some of the poems are where she's thinking in terms of astronomy, and some of them are to do with the treatment she was having for cancer, which went on for years. And I'll read this one. It's actually the last one in the
please do.
collection. It's the one that was featured on the Marginalian, actually, although there were lots of others here that I thought were beautiful. But this one's called Antidotes to Fear of Death. Sometimes, as an antidote to fear of death, I eat the stars. Those nights, lying on my back, I suck them from the quenching dark till they are all inside me, pepper hot and sharp. Sometimes, instead, I stir myself into a universe still young, still warm as blood. No outer space, just space. The light of all the not yet stars, drifting like a bright mist, and all of us and everything already there, but unconstrained by form. And sometimes it's enough to lie down here on earth beside our long ancestral bones, to walk across the cobble fields of our discarded skulls, each like a treasure, like a chrysalis, thinking, whatever left these husks flew off on bright wings.
Wow, that's lovely.
I thought that was beautiful, wasn't it?
That idea of, looking out into the night sky and seeing the past and the stars not yet formed.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
And the cobbled path of, skulls, that's so kind of gothic and interesting,
Yeah. I mean, there's another short poem, I won't read it, but there's another one entitled What If There Were No Moon? And so she sort of just starts saying, there would be no months, there'd be no tides and all of this, and she ends by saying that there'd be nowhere to stand and watch the earth rise.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Not that many of us get to do that, but what a shame that she she had such a short life. Rebecca Elson.
But she left something gorgeous behind.
Yeah, she left something gorgeous behind. And she was a very accomplished astronomer. She worked on the Hubble Space Telescope and, was at the top of her career.
A loss to both fields. I think there's, from what you were telling me, she would have lived for 10 years knowing that, she had this shadow on her. I remember reading this biography of Anthony Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He had quite a long life, but halfway through it, he went to see a doctor who told him he had a year to live. He said nobody had ever told him he had a year to live before. And he sort of took it as a positive, so he just kind of wrote like crazy. I think he wrote Clockwork Orange not long afterwards. Huh. And the second half of his life was, tremendously successful, having been quite unfocused beforehand.
Gosh.
But there's something, and in my own experience of knowing people that, have terminal illnesses, that in some ways it gives you permission to live as well. Huh. I don't know, just an observation, but, the way she was, perhaps it heightened her sense of awe and kind of, just sheer appreciation of the world because she knew she wasn't long for it, perhaps.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Mm. So there's always something new happening, isn't there, in the world of poetry? I just noticed the other day as I was looking at the Forward Prize results and that they have maybe it's not new, but I thought it was new, but they have a category now, apart from best single poem, they have a best single poem brackets written and best single poem brackets performed.
Mm.
Does it mean a written poem cannot be judged on its performance value? I can think of plenty of poets who write well for the page, but who also, performance is also a big element of the poem. It's sort of two aspects of the same poem. So I thought it was interesting splitting them up like that.
That sounds like a really interesting idea, and I think there are some really strong performance poets that perhaps have not been as appreciated and held up as they should be. But it's interesting because, where does that leave someone like, say, Joelle Taylor, who's, a fabulous performer of her work, but also, her work really works on the page.
Yeah.
I don't know how you'd go about sort of separating the sheep from the goats in that. Are you a performance poet? Are you a page poet?
I suppose you might say, well, she's eligible for both, both of those. And I didn't look at the shortlist for those two categories this year in the Forward. So,
well, it's interesting development, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Considering performance poetry goes back to, at least you think of the beat poets, for example, in the 50s or whatever, they were all just performing away like fury.
Yeah, and poetry was declamatory and spoken and learnt by ear for centuries, wasn't it?
Yeah, I like that idea of just reclaiming it from people just scribbling privately to themselves. This idea of poetry being a private art as opposed to be a shareable thing. It's quite possibly a revolutionary thought. Apropos of nothing, I was thinking, I've been brooding about that interview I did with Ian Macmillan.
Oh, yes.
He was talking at one point about being influenced by Frank O'Hara.
Oh, yeah.
Because Ian sometimes incorporates the random, somebody that he's actually met or a person that just kind of wanders into his poems. And so I thought this really is a lacking in me, that I just can't seem to get on with the New York poets. And I thought I'll just go back and try again with a few Frank O'Hara poems. And, I loathe them all over again, actually. I just cannot. I don't know why. So many people I respect love Frank O'Hara, but I just can't.
Goodness, yeah, I mean, he's deified.
It's just like I sort of wandered along the street and I dropped in an artist and we chatted about stuff, and then I wandered off and did something else, and it's like, I don't care. I don't care that you know someone that was famous in the 1950s.
Oh dear. Well, dear listener, I can think of a few people listening now who are just splattering over their coffee at that.
Yeah.
But how great that you came out with that. I love that. It's good to have strong opinions.
Yeah, even if they're misguided and based on ignorance, prejudice.
I don't love everything we read.
I think I just not have to struggle with the New York poets anymore because I just don't like them.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.